Welcome everyone. We're back to the WD45 cultivator tractor. Earlier I did a walk around and demonstration video of this tractor. If you haven't watched it, please check it out. And I talked about how well I really like this Char-Lynn aftermarket power steering. And I believe it dates back to early in the tractor's history, and I'll show you why in a minute. So in this video, I'm going to give a brief description on why I think this power steering system dates back to early in the tractor's history. And then we're going to review the components that make up this power steering system. And then I'm going to show you some of the repairs I made to the power steering to make it work very good again. Please hit the subscription button. It doesn't cost anything and really helps out the channel. And if you've seen something here you liked, please leave a thumbs up. We're also going to look at some of the parts I fabricated and remachined for these steering shafts. But to get a good look at everything, we're going to need to remove this hood first. So to remove this hood, we've got 6 bolts going around the front opening here. 2 of these bolts on top have nuts welded to the inside of the sheet metal, so they're easy to take out. These 2 here and on the opposite side both have a nut behind them, so we got to get a wrench back behind there. And then on the rear of the hood, it's held on by this strap here, and a screwdriver can be put in here, and the strap removed on one side and probably just loosened on the other side, and you can kind of fold it over. And then we have to pull the cap off here, and then the hood should lift straight up. Here's the major components to the power steering system. Up here we have a pump, and I'll come back and look at each of these a little closer. And then this hose here is a pressure line. This hose here is a return line. So pressure line comes down to the steering unit. It's also called a torque generator. And then so fluid comes in there. Let's take a closer look at the pump a minute. So here's a closer look at the pump. Here's this pressure line coming out of the pump. It's a steel line here. And then the return line is just hose clamped on. This is a Saginaw or General Motors power steering pump. I believe it's from the 1970s. I'll talk more about the pump later because this is the one I added. And this pump is driven off of a belt from the generator. This is a double pulley. One belt drives the power steering pump, the other belt drives the fan and water pump, and they're both driven from the crankshaft on the engine. So that pump is providing oil and pressure into this steering generator or torque generator, and it's coupled to the steering shaft. So when you turn the steering wheel here, if you notice, I can move this top one here, and the lower section here is not moving at all. So this kind of acts as a valve. Now when it's running, it changes a little bit. When it's running, it senses that you're steering it, and then it'll power it to turn the lower part of the shaft here. This tractor is a 1953, and Allis Chalmers did not come out with factory power steering until I believe 1956. So this is a Char-Lynn aftermarket power steering, and the steering torque generator, I believe, is a model S101, which dates back to the 50s from what I can gather. And I'll show you why I think it also may have been belonged to this tractor early in its history. When I purchased this tractor, it had this power steering pump on. This is a Saginaw power steering pump, which is owned by General Motors. I believe it's either a division of them or they bought them out. But from what I can tell, this is they started making this pump in 1956. So like I said, the tractor's a 53. So between a 1956 pump and the Char-Lynn torque generator, it's also from that same era. And if you look at this brochure here showing a power steering system on what looks to be a WD or a WD45, I believe this cultivator tractor could have had this on early in its life. So I believe this probably was an aftermarket system. This is the original bracketry here, and this does not look like something you would fabricate up in your garage. This is a professionally bent piece here with some strength ribs in it. I never thought that these power steering systems would work all that well, although I've never had one in the past. And when I got this tractor, it literally did not work at all. You could still steer the tractor because you can still power it through that torque generator. But of course, I checked the obvious things. The fluid was okay. And then I put a pressure gauge on the pump, and it built almost no pressure. It barely registered on the gauge. I don't even know if it built 20 pounds of pressure. So I knew that was an issue. I tore apart the pump, and here's what I found inside. So inside this pump, it has a rotor, and in this rotor are little veins that retract in and out that pump the oil. And an area in between the veins you see is cracked right out of there. So that's the reason why it wouldn't build any pressure. I was not able to find any repair parts for this. You can buy some rings, a ring kit on eBay where you can rebuild just the section in that pump. I have not found one for the 1956 style, so they're probably out there. But if I do come across one sometime, I'd like to rebuild that pump. But a friend of mine gave me this pump. It's another Saginaw pump, I believe, probably from the late 60s into the 1970s. This is a pretty common pump. The pump was different enough where I had to make an entirely new bracket. While I used the similar concept to what they had, I did have to make some modifications. This originally, head bolts would go through here, and this bolted down to the top of the head. Of course, then the pump mounted through here, and you were able to adjust the pump up and down, which would give you your belt tightening here. So here's a little closer look at the bracket. We'll get a view looking down on top of the pump and see if we can see how it bolts onto the head. Here's a top view looking down on the pump. It's kind of hard to see with the coolant lines in the way, but the bracket does mount to the head using the existing head bolts. And of course we have the slots here for adjustment. And I added a reinforcing bracket here. Now in 1956, when they came out with a factory system, I believe they had a sub bracket bolted to the front of the motor somehow. I've never seen one in real life. I have seen pictures. And I want to say the pump may have been on the other side or more towards the center of the engine. In order to check the fluid in the pump, you need to remove the hood. I wasn't able to bring it to myself to cut a hole through the hood. I don't like it when that happens, but these hoods really aren't that expensive, so I did it. If I did do that, it wouldn't be the end of the world. But if it's not leaking, you really probably only need to check it once a year. While I don't know for sure if this is the power steering system featured in that brochure I'm showing, I don't have any other pages of that brochure other than the one that's shown. It does appear to be old and from about the vintage of this tractor, so I would imagine if a guy is cultivating all day long with this narrow front, power steering would be a welcome addition. Now I would imagine this steering turned a lot of times during its lifetime, so these couplings here were pretty well worn out on the shafts. The torque generator steering part right here probably had hardened shafts in. Those were worn very little. So I machined new couplings here, and they're held together by roll pins. If the shaft were worn at all, I don't recall exactly what I did with this one. I may have welded it up and returned it. This shaft here, I believe I just replaced. So we had two new couplings. And then over here, this was a factory Allis Chalmers holder bracket here. The shaft went through here. So this originally did not have a grease fitting in. I machined this inner diameter of this out and put in a bushing. So now I have a new bushing on a good shaft, and it's greasable now. Now, as you follow the shaft further down, it runs into a U-joint. Pretty hard to see it from the top, so we're going to crawl underneath. We're underneath the tractor now. Here's the U-joint. This U-joint was well worn out. I had another one laying around, which was in very good shape, so I put that in. And again, these shafts, I ended up rebuilding, so they're good and tight to the U-joint again. There was always a holder bracket here, which was almost worn completely through. And I believe they did originally have a grease fitting on as well. I think it was worn so much the grease fitting didn't even fit any longer. So I ended up making an entirely new arm here and a little thicker bushing around here, and put a grease zerk back in it again. So after the steering shaft comes out of the U-joint, goes through this mount here, and continues on. Comes all the way into the steering gearbox here. And then there's a worm gear on the end of it. That turns a sector gear to turn that wheel. I ended up splicing into the shaft here because further up where it connects into the U-joint, it was badly worn. I sectioned in a new piece, so I have a coupling here. And while we looked at this bracket a little earlier, I completely fabricated a new bracket from scratch, making it similar to the old one. And new hoses were put on. And I made a hose holder bracket that mounts on top the valve cover studs. So new hoses down, and if you follow it down to the torque generator, you see this, there's a port or a manifold where these hoses run into. That's not the original one. I ended up cracking that, and I'll show you that. Here's the manifold block where the hydraulic hoses would have gone into. You can see the crack here. When I was tightening the hoses, I must have over-tightened this hose here and it cracked. Of course, so here's the new block that I made, and it's replacing this one here. Looks a little different, but it works just fine. So with a power steering pump that puts out good pressure, new hoses, and rebuilding all the steering shafts and U-joint, it steers very well. The steering is very tight, and I'm very happy with it. I'll just do one more demonstration of it turning. You hear it hit the stop. Pressure release. That is all for the Char-Lynn Aftermarket power steering. The system works really well, much better than I ever thought it would. I never had to do anything to the Char-Lynn power unit or torque generator. I didn't replace seals. It just worked fine as it was. Please leave a thumbs up if you like this video. In the next video, it will involve wheat. I think it'll be very interesting. Hope you can stay tuned in to watch that.